Today, I want to talk about beer. Beer is a central part of English life in its typical variant in pubs. Pubs are the bars that you find across the United Kingdom and throughout England. Beer is different in England to in Spain. In Spain, the kind of beer you get is from a pump. It's or from a bottle, and it's always a light lager beer. Whereas in England, typically the pubs offer bitter. They also offer lager, but lager is generally imported. Lagers come from Belgium, from France, from Germany, and even from as far away as Australia. Whereas bitter is a unique English production. Bitter is a form of ale, ale being an older term for beer. Ale in the 1970s was taken over by a campaign for real ale, which was set up by a group of three men in Northern Ireland, I believe, um, but quickly spread around the UK and was particularly popular with primary school teachers in woolly jumpers. They would gather together in free houses, which are a particular kind of pub. That's not a tied pub. A tied pub is a pub that sells beer sent to it by the brewery. So most pubs, well, actually, I think it's about half of the pubs in England are tied to breweries. That means that they only sell the beers on pump that come from the brewery that owns the pub. The person who serves you is the landlord. They they rent the pub from the brewery and they're the person in charge of the pub. So when you have a pint in a Tide pub, it will be one of the big brands of beer, like Green King, for example. The campaign for real ale saw that the proliferation of this new homogenized product of industrially produced beer was slowly eliminating traditional beers. And the traditional beers were ales. Where I come from in Somerset, there were many smaller breweries, especially in rural areas. So I remember one called Exmoor Ale, for example, and I used to have a pint of this beer in a free house close to St. Mary Magdalene Church called the Mason's Arms. Now, those beers would be served from a barrel and not from a pump. And the barman would open a spigot or a tap and pour the beer directly from the barrel into the glass. And that beer had sediment which floated in the beer, and that was a part of the experience of drinking that beer. You wouldn't complain if you saw things floating in your beer. In fact, that would be seen as more authentic. Along with the promotion of real ale, the campaign for real ale also promoted other things such as traditional cider, scrumpy, for example, or perry, which is similar to cider but made from pears, and then other traditional beers like mild or porter, which I believe are similar to stout, which is most commonly known in Spain as Guinness. Um, I think porter and mild are both dark beers generally, and they have a similar look to Guinness, but they're not quite as thick as Guinness in the mouth, in my opinion. Now, beer has connotations within England as being a particular kind of drink that was drunk by common people. Um, I understand that before the Industrial Revolution and even during the Industrial Revolution, people would drink a lot of beer. They would drink a lot of beer. They would almost always drink beer with their meal. And beer would also be given to children to drink. Before you get shocked, that beer was different. It was a beer that was called small beer. Small beer because it wasn't very strong. It didn't have a high alcohol content. And they would also put bits of bread in it and soak things in the beer. Small beer as a word, as an expression, has entered the English language. So if I say that something is small beer, it means it's of no importance. For example, you might say, what did you talk about with John last week? Ah, nothing, small beer. Small beer meaning nothing important. Now, there are many expressions that might be useful to you or interesting to you related to beer and beer drinking. For example, if you have a little bit too much to drink, you might be considered to be um, three sheets to the wind. Three sheets to the wind means you've had quite a lot to drink and you're a little bit unstable. You might also be say that somebody is well oiled, or if an official person like a policeman comes and confronts you, they might say, "Excuse me, sir, are you under the influence?" They do not need to say under the influence of alcohol. Under the influence is that's what it means. Under the influence means that you've had too much to drink. If you've drunk really a lot, then you might be said to be hammered or plastered. That connection with hammering and plastering might indicate that the people that drink are probably your typical tradesmen. Uh, when you're out drinking with friends, and you often give a toast, and when you give a toast, you raise your glass, and after you give your toast, you might say bottoms up. That doesn't mean your bottom. That means the bottom of the glass. You raise the bottom of the glass and you drink. Bottoms up. Now, beer has generally positive connotations in English culture, uh, and this goes back a long way in time. And I want to look at an English satirical artist called William Hogarth. Here he is in his self portrait. He shows himself as a common man. He doesn't wear a fancy hat or a fancy jacket. There he is in a little oval roundel, and in front of him is a very common looking dog, looking a little bit pensive, perhaps. Perhaps he's had some small beer. Hogarth obviously saw himself as a common satirist of the morals and mores of his society. He did a series of engravings that were very popular in his time. Here's one from a series called Mariage à la mode, or Fashionable Marriage, in which tells the story of a young man who marries a young woman for her money, and she turns into a libertine, and he just loses all of his money. Um, Here's another example of a similar theme. It's called The Rake's Progress, and this is how a wealthy young man manages to lose all of his money by his profligate lifestyle. But we're talking about beer. We're not talking about the aristocrats here, and the beer is definitely to do with common people. Fortunately, Hogarth left us another example of his vision of uh, English drinking culture, and here we have Beer Street. In Beer Street, we can see there are plenty of people on the street. Right in the front, there's a fat man who has obviously eaten very well and is quaffing some beer on the street. Uh, this isn't critical. This is showing that beer is good for you. Beer makes you into a fat and healthy person. Up on a ladder, there is a man with a long nose painting a pub sign. Pub signs like you can still see around the United Kingdom. In the background, you can see that there are people working on the buildings. They're building a church with a glistening steeple, and everybody is going about their business in a very active way. The only people in this picture who are not active are on the right-hand side, and you can see there's a rather dilapidated building with three balls hanging out on a stick. Those three balls represent a pawnbroker or a pawn shop. A pawnbroker is where you go when you don't have any money left and you need to sell your possessions to get enough money to make the next month. So here the pawn shop is nearing bankruptcy because everybody is doing very well because they're drinking beer. Now, this one side of the story would not be complete if you didn't have the other side, and the other side is Gin Alley. Gin Alley is a contrast in all respects. Right at the front of this picture, we can see a woman who is sitting on some steps. She's obviously not in her right mind. You might say she's three sheets to the wind. She's got her breasts exposed and her baby is about to fall on the ground. On her legs there are sores from drinking too much. And right in front of her there is a skeletal figure of a man who looks as though he's about to die. Behind her on the left is the pawn house, and that is the only building in the whole picture that is in good repair. You can see that the sign is firmly attached to the building, and in front there is a man with a very ample wig, prepared to accept the possessions of some people begging money from him. And they're not only selling their possessions, but the tools of their trade, including a saw. This means that these people will not be working. The street behind shows complete chaos with somebody being wheeled along in a wheelbarrow. And in one of the buildings, there is a man hanging who has obviously committed suicide. Now, Hogarth here is presenting a satirical picture which shows the effects of what was the drug of his time. Of course, the drugs of our time are quite different. If you see anything to do with fentanyl in the United States, for example, you might imagine one of our modern satirists taking a critical look at those modern customs. That's pretty much what it was like for Hogarth. He was satirizing the modern introduction of gin. How ironic that gin and tonic, the drink of the upper classes in Empire Britain, at its inception was seen as a terrible drug that would destroy society. So there we have it. Beer has positive connotations in the United Kingdom. It doesn't have such positive connotations when the English go abroad, and as a result, you end up with lager louts. Lager louts are young men who walk around in groups, drink too much beer, and then go on the rampage. They fall down in the streets, they cause fights, they vomit over the cash machine. Those are lager louts, and they are engaged in binge drinking. A binge is when you have too much of something in too short a time. So there you go. This little video has been small beer, but we've tackled it with a goodwill, and I hope you will at some time have a chance to try those real ales that are